The story of Elizabeth Klarer begins on a cold, foggy morning in the vast plains of Mui River, South Africa. The sun had not yet fully dissipated the mist hanging over the fields, creating an almost magical atmosphere where every sound seemed amplified, and the air carried a peculiar freshness. Elizabeth, then a child of only 7 years old, felt an unusual chill as she walked alongside her sister Barbara. They were both busy with their daily tasks, feeding the animals on the family farm, when something inexplicable happened. The sky, which had been a clear and peaceful blue, was suddenly cut by a silver gleam that seemed out of this world. Elizabeth looked up and, together with her sister, witnessed a phenomenon that would mark their lives forever. A disc-shaped object, metallic, shining like a pearl under the timid rays of the sun, flew silently over their heads. The object seemed to defy the laws of physics, moving fluidly and precisely until it disappeared over the horizon as quickly as it had appeared. The soft humming sound that accompanied its trajectory still echoed in their ears, like a sinister melody that refused to be forgotten. For the young sisters, the event was as intriguing as it was frightening. Barbara, trying to find an explanation, quickly associated what they saw with the lightning bird, a mythical figure from local folklore. This legendary creature, according to stories told by the elders, was known to be surrounded by thunder and lightning, appearing in the sky to announce disasters or profound changes. But for Elizabeth, there was something more to that experience. There was a feeling she could not name, a sense that the encounter was the prelude to something much bigger, something her young mind could not yet comprehend. Years passed, and the memories of that day began to fade slowly, buried under the responsibilities and routines of adult life. Elizabeth grew up to become a woman of remarkable talents, with an insatiable curiosity and a deep desire to explore the world around her. She traveled to different countries, studied at renowned universities, and developed skills that set her apart from most people of her time. From an early age, she mastered several languages, becoming fluent in complex languages like Latin and ancient Greek. In music, her mastery was evident, playing the piano and violin with the dexterity of a concert performer. Her passion for knowledge led her to explore fields that few ventured into, such as meteorology, which she studied diligently at the prestigious University of Cambridge. But even as she excelled in her various pursuits, there was a part of Elizabeth that always felt an inexplicable attraction to that morning in Mui River. It was as if something inside her was calling her back, as if a fragment of her soul had been left in that misty field, waiting to be rediscovered. And that feeling began to gain strength on December 27, 1954, when a new event changed the course of her life. It was a hot summer afternoon in South Africa, and Elizabeth was at home attending to her daily chores. The calm of the day was suddenly interrupted by the frantic shouts of the farm workers. They pointed to the sky with expressions of panic while running toward the safety of the buildings. Something strange was happening in the nearby mountains, something that made Elizabeth's heart race in her chest. Feeling an irresistible curiosity, she dropped everything she was doing and ran toward Catkin Peak, the same mountain that had dominated the landscape around her home since childhood. When Elizabeth finally reached the top, the sight that awaited her was both terrifying and fascinating. There, hovering a few meters above the ground, was a disc-shaped object much like the one she had seen as a child. But this time, she was closer, and the details of the craft were even more impressive. The metallic surface of the object reflected the sunlight in an almost hypnotic manner, and the air around it seemed to vibrate with an energy she had never felt before. The soft, constant hum that seemed to emanate from the craft was now more intense, filling the atmosphere with a frequency that made her bones vibrate slightly. Elizabeth was paralyzed, unable to take her eyes off the craft. Her entire body seemed attuned to that strange presence, as if something within her was awakening to a new reality. As she looked more closely, she noticed that there were 3 windows in the central dome of the object, and behind these windows, a pair of eyes watched her intently. They were human eyes, but there was something different about them, something Elizabeth couldn't define. They were intense, deep, as if they could see beyond her flesh, directly into her soul. Time seemed to have stopped as she and the figure inside the craft maintained eye contact. Elizabeth felt a mixture of fear and fascination, as if she were in the presence of something divine and at the same time frighteningly alien. Suddenly, as if sensing the danger of getting too close, the object lifted into the air and disappeared in the blink of an eye, leaving Elizabeth alone at the top of the mountain, with the echo of the hum still reverberating in her ears. What had happened? Who were those beings? And why did she feel that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever? The days that followed were filled with pure restlessness for Elizabeth. Her mind was consumed by the image of that craft, those eyes. She began to feel a strange connection with that being, as if he were somehow present, even when she could not see him. The feeling was so intense that it began to interfere with her daily routine. She could barely sleep, and when she did, she was tormented by vivid dreams where she was transported to unknown places, surrounded by bright lights and incomprehensible sounds. These dreams, though disturbing, also brought a sense of familiarity, as if she were reconnecting with something deeply rooted in her very essence. 2 years passed since the last sighting, and Elizabeth's restlessness only grew. It was as if something within her was preparing for a reunion, something she could no longer ignore. On a morning in April 1956, she finally gave in to the call she felt inside her. Driven by an invisible force, Elizabeth once again climbed Catkin Peak, alone, with the certainty that something was going to happen. When she reached the top, her heart raced at what awaited her. There it was, the same object that had haunted her for so long, but this time it was resting on the ground, as if waiting for her. The air around the craft was charged with the same strange energy she had felt years before, but now there was something more, a presence, a consciousness that seemed to be in tune with hers, as if they were two magnets drawn to each other. And then she saw him. The being she had seen inside the craft 2 years earlier was now standing outside, waiting for her. He was tall, much taller than any human Elizabeth had ever met. His skin was of such a pale tone that it almost seemed translucent, reflecting the sunlight in a peculiar way. His hair, now short and white as snow, shone with a silvery hue under the daylight. But what most caught Elizabeth's attention were his eyes. Those same gray eyes that had stared at her 2 years earlier now seemed even more intense, but with a softness she hadn't noticed before. There was kindness in them, a tenderness that made her feel safe, as if she were in the presence of someone who knew her deeply, far beyond what any human could understand. The being extended his hand to Elizabeth, and despite her hands trembling with nervousness, she accepted the gesture. As she touched his hand, a wave of comforting warmth spread through her body, dispelling all the fear and anxiety she had accumulated over the years. The feeling was one of peace, of healing, as if the energy emanating from that being was purifying every cell in her body, healing wounds she didn't even know existed. Without saying a word, he guided her into the craft, and together they entered. The interior of the craft was surprisingly simple, yet it carried an aura of mystery and sophistication. The walls were smooth and shiny, with a texture Elizabeth had never seen before. The light that illuminated the environment did not seem to come from a specific source. Instead, it seemed to emanate from all the surfaces around her, creating a soft and welcoming atmosphere. The gentle hum she had heard before was now clearer, and it seemed to come from the floor, vibrating slightly beneath her feet, as if the craft were alive, pulsing with its own energy. They walked down a long, narrow corridor where Elizabeth could barely see the end. As they walked in silence, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if she had been in that place before, in another time, in another life. This feeling only intensified when they reached a larger room, where a second being was waiting. This being was different, but equally impressive. Younger, with slightly darker skin and darker hair, he had an equally imposing presence, but with a more vibrant, almost youthful energy. Elizabeth was invited to sit down, and as she did, she felt a slight tremor under her feet. They were taking off, But what surprised her the most was that despite the movement, she did not feel any sensation of acceleration or change in direction. It was as if they were being carried by a force that transcended the laws of physics as she knew them. Without any sensation of movement, Elizabeth realized that she had been transported to another place, another craft, much larger than the previous one. Akon, the being who had brought her there, began to speak to her, but he did not use words. The communication was telepathic, the words appearing in her mind as if they had always been there, waiting to be understood. Every thought transmitted by Akon was clear, precise, as if they were in complete harmony. He explained that she was now aboard a planet craft, a gigantic artifact that orbited the Earth at an unimaginable altitude. This craft, a kind of space ark, housed an entire civilization, composed of beings from different planets, all living in perfect harmony. Akon revealed that he and Elizabeth had a deep connection that transcended lives and dimensions. They were soulmates, separated by eras and stellar distances, but finally reunited. As they walked through the interior of the planet craft, Elizabeth was amazed at what she saw. Lush gardens grew under a soft, artificial light that mimicked sunlight. There were houses scattered about, simple and elegant structures, and the air was filled with a sweet, natural fragrance, like that of fresh flowers. The environment was serene, almost idyllic, and every detail seemed to have been planned to create a sense of peace and tranquility. In one of the gardens, Elizabeth saw children playing, laughing, running among the trees, while adults worked the land, tending to plants and animals with an almost sacred dedication. Everyone there lived in a state of absolute peace, something that seemed surreal to someone who had grown up in the turmoil and violence of the 20th century. It was there, in that almost idyllic environment, that Akon told Elizabeth about his true origin. He came from a planet called Meton, in the Alpha Centauri system, a place where life flourished in a completely different way from Earth. Akon explained that the inhabitants of Meton were the guardians of cosmic balance, and their work was to transform hostile planets into homes for new civilizations. They had done this with Meton, a planet similar to Earth, but more evolved, where war, hunger, and disease were things of the past. But there was more. Akon told Elizabeth that she was actually one of them, reincarnated on Earth to fulfill a special mission. She had been chosen to help create a new lineage, a hybrid between humans and Metonians, that would have the potential to unite the two races and ensure a peaceful future for both planets. Elizabeth, with her scientific mind and indomitable spirit, was the perfect partner for Akon. At that moment, Elizabeth understood that her life would never be the same again. She was not just an ordinary woman. She was a crucial piece in a cosmic plan that went far beyond anything she could imagine. In the months that followed, Elizabeth and Akon met several times, always at the top of Katkin Peak. Akon taught her about the wonders of the universe, about the secrets of the stars and galaxies, and about Earth's role in this vast cosmic scheme. During one of these meetings, Akon gave Elizabeth a silver ring, which he explained was an amplifier of her telepathic abilities, allowing them to communicate even when they were worlds apart. The ring was simple, but it carried an energy that Elizabeth could feel vibrating in her hand, as if it were an extension of her own consciousness. It was also during this period that Elizabeth conceived a child, the result of her union with Akon. The pregnancy brought both joy and danger. Elizabeth began to be pursued by government agents who had somehow learned of her situation. They were determined to capture her and study her child, believing that he could be the key to unlocking the secrets of extraterrestrial life. Elizabeth felt increasingly vulnerable, knowing that at any moment she could be found and taken by force. But she also knew that Akon was always nearby, watching her from afar, ready to intervene if the danger became unbearable. And that moment arrived. On a dark night, while Elizabeth was driving down a deserted road, she was suddenly enveloped by a bright light. The world around her disappeared, and in the blink of an eye, she found herself aboard Akon's craft. on her way to Meton. The relief she felt upon seeing him again was indescribable. She knew she was safe, that he would not allow anything bad to happen to her or the child she was carrying. In Meton, Elizabeth gave birth to a healthy boy who was named Eileen. The birth of Eileen was a moment of triumph, not just for Elizabeth, but for the entire civilization of Meton. He was the first of a new generation, a hybrid being who possessed the best of both worlds. Elizabeth spent some time on Meton, learning more about the culture and life of that people. They welcomed her as one of their own, and she saw firsthand the kindness and wisdom of that civilization. However, Elizabeth knew she could not stay. Her body, adapted to Earth, would not withstand the conditions of Meton for much longer. With a heavy heart, she said goodbye to Akon and her son and returned to her home planet. Back on Earth, Elizabeth was met with skepticism and disbelief. Her story was so fantastic that few were willing to believe her. However, Elizabeth never allowed the doubts of others to shake her conviction. She knew what she had experienced and was determined to share her story with the world, regardless of the consequences. In the years that followed, Elizabeth continued to have contact with Akon and Eileen, following the growth of her son through telepathic messages and holograms. She wrote books, gave lectures, and became a respected figure in the ufological community. Although many ridiculed her story, others saw her as a pioneer, a brave woman who dared to challenge the boundaries of human knowledge. If you enjoy the topic and love incredible stories like this one about Elizabeth Klarer, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That way, YouTube will recommend our next videos to you and help deliver this content to more people interested in the world of ufology. Elizabeth Klarer passed away in 1994, but her story continues to fascinate and inspire those who seek to understand the mysteries of the universe. Her life was an extraordinary journey, a saga of love, courage, and discovery that reminds us that in the vast cosmos, there is much more than we can see with our eyes or comprehend with our minds. Elizabeth Klarer's legacy lives on in every person who gazes at the stars and wonders, are we really alone? Her story is an invitation to explore the unknown, to open our minds to the infinite possibilities the universe offers, and to consider that perhaps the truth is much stranger and more wonderful than any fiction. Until the next story,